if we can look past those things, past the physical conditions, there is this whole other world with this other meaning assigned to it that we can tap into.
This is an empowerment of an understanding of how all that's happening and the entire experience of it, you're at the source of. Well,
that's right.
Welcome, Cristina. It's great to have this opportunity for this conversation and just introduce you. This will be, a lot of people might know me who are tuning in on this, but Cristina Ruscica, a friend of mine, and we've recently connected more on Facebook and sort of gotten to know each other a bit more. But we thought that this conversation would be so relevant, especially when it comes to various things that have happened in our lives and how they might affect us and potentially limit us, or all kinds of those types of experiences. And that's something that, and so Cristina, I'm going to ask you to just introduce yourself a little bit because of both the context of what we're going to talk about, but also what you do today, because that's so relevant to our conversation as well. And then we'll sort of backtrack and kind of go.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Dominic. And thank you very much for having me here and sharing this time and space with me, and to allow this conversation to just take us to where it needs to go. So my story, my journey, and the work that I do now, it's all linked together. And it's actually really interesting how things have unfolded. And that typically goes for how things happen in life. We just never know. And it really emphasizes the importance of being open to just seeing life from different perspectives to allow us to be taken to where we need to go. And so my story, I mean, it goes back to typical theme that I know so many others out there have experienced, maybe experiencing now, or know of someone who have experienced it, starting with the childhood trauma, the childhood abuse, and just seeing the ways how that has transpired and how it evolves into our life and how things manifest even later on and in our adult life. And so I find that my story is unique and interesting in the sense of the work that I do now is centered around helping others to find their way out of the messiness, the barriers, the obstacles that they find themselves up against when they've experienced past trauma in some capacity. So my journey had led me to not only having the lived experience, so I have the perspective of having that lived experience piece, but then I went on and created a career for myself that was focused on helping others. I had a career 24 years as a child protection worker. So working with investigating, child abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and working with families and working with the insides, working with all perspectives, all sides of when these experiences happen in families. Then from there, I went on to realizing in my adult life some of the patterns and things that were showing up for me as a result of the things that I had experienced before. And I call that my breaking point. You can call it the awakening moments. People have different names that they assign to when you have that epiphany, when you start to see things from a different perspective and you just start to see things very different than what they were before. And through this time in my life, everything from the past, it's like everything just kind of just fit together in a way that it never had before. And not only for myself, but that I was able to see the ways how families have experienced these same things and some of the ways that they have been going around life, coming up into the same cycles, the same patterns, the same unhealthy relationship patterns, the same things that were showing up for them. And so in my moment of understanding things in a different way for myself, I was then able to translate it to seeing how things, how this translated for others as well. And I just realized that, wait, there's a different way to do life. Like there's a whole other way here to manage this and to overcome these things that maybe we weren't taught, or maybe that we haven't been doing in the traditional sense because of the work that I had been doing. So through all this, it was a profound realization, and I captured it all in my journals, which I'm so forever grateful for, because as I was going through this was 6-7 years ago, and I captured every moment of seeing this life in this different perspective. It's like this whole other world opened to me. And the theme of it all was that nothing is what it seems, to see beyond the conditions look beyond the conditions, meaning that the physical things that are showing up in front of us, it was like everything was just representations of something else, something bigger. And if we can look past those things, past the physical conditions, there is this whole other world with this other meaning assigned to it that we can tap into that helps make sense of all these other things that didn't make sense. So I wrote a book about all this because of my journaling and able to capture it all. And I call it the pathway of my healing. The title of my book is called Breathe Wide Open, but I call it the pathway of my healing because it really was the pathway that opened up for me that allowed me to experience healing in such a way that I had never felt before. There is no other modality, no other thing that had brought this to me other than this connection, this new connection that I had with life in this way. And so then, of course, once we start seeing things in this way, our first instinct is, well, I have to share this. Like I have to, everybody needs to know this, right? But there's ways to go about doing that. And so I found my way in creating the business that I now have for myself that allows me to bring me to the table, which is very different than the work that I had been doing before. It feels very different where I'm able to bring me to the table. I'm able to bring my life experience to help guide and direct and, help point others in the direction of where they can look within themselves to find the answers that they need in a way that's far more healing and far more, the insights and the realizations and things that the transformation breakthroughs that people have from this has just been so incredible. So I'm so incredibly grateful for all of it. It allows me then to go back, on the journey and seeing where I started from. And yeah, I can say I'm grateful for it. I truly am because I have found purpose in it now. Right. So, and that's
Wow.
the difference.
Wow. So the title of your book, once again, just to have
it's Breathe Wide Open.
Breathe Wide Open.
Breathe Wide Open. Yes.
Yeah. And so today you're continuing to sort of engage in this, in supporting others and from a newer, deeper perspective than you did during your career as a child protection worker with.
Yes.
So what was that point where you saw beyond? What was at the surface in the conditions and in the kind of like the reality that we're all looking at? What was that point and what sparked it?
Well, I believe that we all have our own way or our own crevice that the universe likes to kind of sneak into and open us up through. You can call it our weakness, right? And in my case, it came through my relationship. So it was my marriage, the ending of my marriage, and the relationships that followed after, where I was in this pattern of where it just seemed like heartbreak after heartbreak and the same outcomes, the same types of people that were coming into my life. And for a long time, I was in the blame game, right? It wasn't me. It was, because he did this or because, he was like this or he treated me this way. And it was a lot of the time that I had spent was pointing the finger at everything else around me. If only something outside of me would change, if only the perfect man would show up in my life, everything would be great. So someone else outside of there just has to act and behave different in order for me to feel okay. So my breaking point, that moment was right after a very hurtful heartbreak that I had been experiencing, that I've been going through. This is in my book because it really is a pivotal moment. This is what opened everything up. I was away at a cottage with my children and they were younger then. This was probably 7 years ago now. But anyways, this thing happened. We were out on the lake. It was a stupid move on my part. Didn't pack life jackets. We were out on the canoe. Didn't know anything about canoeing. And we had an unbalanced canoe that then tipped in the lake and flipped my son and I over. And so we're in the middle of the lake and I was holding on to him for his life. Like I was so scared. I've never felt that scared before in my life. And the waves, it was 30 feet of water. The waves, it was quite rough out that day. And that's why the canoe did what it did. And so I was just holding on to him and I was holding onto the canoe for, to keep us stable because we didn't have life jackets. And all I kept saying is, because he had my arm, it was like kind of like that double grip. And I was like yelling at him, don't let go, just don't let go. And he kept saying, Mom, I can do this. I can swim back. You have to let go. And I'm screaming and I'm pleading with him, like, do not let go. Do not let go. Because I was like panicked that if I let go, that he would just be taken away by the waves and not be able to make his way back. But then there was a moment where he made that decision and he pulled his arm away from me and he said, I'm letting go. You have to let go. And he let go. And in that moment, his words, let go, that it just started echoing in my head. But then it was no longer his voice, if that makes sense. Wow. It was like, it just took on different. And I just kept hearing, let go, let go, let go. And the waves were like, I don't know if it was a water or the way that the sun was kind of shining on the lake. There was something that happened. It was just like this complete tranquility, this complete peace that just, I felt this blanket right over instantly. And then as I looked over and I saw my son, strong as can be, making his way back to shore with no problems at all, making his way back. And I was there and I was still holding onto the canoe and I was just kind of hanging on, floating and just looking around. And all I could hear was let go. And I knew that it was no longer about that. It was no longer about, what was happening and, the canoe and my son or anything like that. This was far deeper. And the way how I understood it was letting go of what have I been holding on to? What are the beliefs that I was holding on to about who I was? What was the identity that I was holding on to because of my past? What were the things what was the story that I had been keeping myself within that I had to let go of? And all these things just kind of crashed in and it's like, this is it. This is the piece. This is what I'd been missing for all this time because I've been holding myself within a certain story, right? Because when we have trauma and things that happen to us, we assume the victim, and that just manifests and shows up in so many different ways. But this moment, it's like, boom, everything just clarified. It's like, wow, let go. And so from that moment on, I was just on a mission I wanted to hear that voice again. I wanted to hear that again. And so I just continued to strengthen this more and more and did a deep dive into more study just around the mind and the universe, the laws, all those things, because everything just kind of unfolded from there.
Oh, wow. That's such clarity in that story. And the way you heard those words in a deeper way. It's amazing how the timing of that and how that communication would come to you with such clarity, but at a depth, just amazing. It's something when you think about that, and would you describe that as the moment of healing or that moment or that time is that?
I call that my awakening moment. And the reason why I call it my awakening is because I feel like that was really when I woke up to seeing in a different way. Whether you want to interpret that as, being asleep, I don't know if that really makes sense, but just waking up to seeing things in a different way than before. So that's how I relate to it, as my awakening moment.
Wow. Yeah. And then how did that realization then begin to affect and have you see your work and all of that in new ways?
Everything changed from that moment on. Everything changed. And as I mentioned before, I had been capturing everything in my journal. And so as things were happening, like I was using the physical life experiences that were happening around me, whether they were in my own personal life or whether with the families that I was working with, where I was able to see these experiences as, okay, again, seeing beyond the conditions, where things no longer seem to be about the thing itself, right? Taking, for example, relationships, because it's easy to measure that. So someone's in an unhealthy relationship, say, whether it is an abusive relationship or a power control or whatever is going on, yes, that thing is happening. And yes, action has to be taken in that space. However, to actually heal from that and to notice the pattern, notice the cycle that's happening within that, then it requires us going within to really take a look at what is it that I'm holding within myself that is then attracting this to me. And this isn't to say that we are to blame for the horrible things that happen to us. However, the way how it changed my perspective on just all these things is there's an element of responsibility that we have to take. And it can be difficult at times because it means that it's all on us, right? To do that inner work. But that really is what it's about. If we want to see that change, if we want to see that change in the patterns and the things that are showing up for us, we have to go within. Like there's no other way. There is no other way. It's not a matter of, having a person change their behavior or, if you do this, then things will be better for me. It's an inside job and it's really going within. And so for my work, as valuable and as needed as that work is, the work that I had done in my career, we could only go so far. Like, that's what I felt like. I could only go so far to helping people because the work was designed to focus on what is happening right now and focusing on, well, you have to do this, this, and this based on the physical experiences that are showing up. And I always want to just take it deeper. Right? Where it's like, okay, well, let's look at, let's just see this from a different perspective and let's look beyond the conditions just for a minute. Like, what is it that you're holding within? Like, is it a story around your sense of self-worth or what self-love means to you? Or, what is your idea of relationships and things like that are creating the story that's perpetuating this pattern. And I always just want to dive in deeper to help people to kind of see within themselves where they really need to look to heal.
Wow. Wow. We really, like you said, the part about the owning that, so many people hear that word, like the responsibility, like now you're blaming for what happened or everything like that. And that is such a common misunderstanding of it, because this isn't a blame conversation. This is really an empowerment conversation. It's about an empowerment conversation, because to the extent that you're seeing a world and you're experiencing a world where things are happening to you, that you are not the source of these things, that they just happen to you, and you're unfortunate, really, to have experienced a number of these things, then there's no power in that. There's no realization of, the way I'll say it, there's no realization of who you really are. You have no idea who you really are. And so, when we talk about responsibility in these conversations, it's a realization of who you really are and how nothing happens to you. Nothing happens to you. There is an experience that is created through you, from within you, and it's to the degree that you are, and most of us, we're totally oblivious to it, right? So there's this powerful creative energy within us, lives and breathes us, distorted through some thoughts and thinking that, as a child, like as a result of things that have happened in the past, thoughts are left like, well, I'm not strong and I can't say no. And whatever these thoughts are that are left. And then this creative power just keeps proving to you that you're right, you can't. You're right, you can't. And here's another example of how you can't. And here's another example of how these kinds of things will happen to you and all of that. And so then we're living it, which, by the way, is just proving my truth. It's just proving what I believe to begin with. Those same thoughts from, decades ago, my current life experience is proving are actually the way that it is. And I'm not in charge and I have no say about it. And this just continues to prove it. And so then when we say responsibility and people say, so wait, so now you're blaming me for all of this that's going on? No, this isn't blame. This is an empowerment of an understanding of how all that's happening and the entire experience of it, you're at the source of. Well, if you start to discover you're at the source of it, then that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that too, because that's exactly it. And I really appreciate, the whole concept of the power, and it's not power in the sense of, being forceful and being all powerful or anything else, but we all have this within us. And it really, I call it the energy leak, right? When we give our power away, and we do that by when we are placing our own well-being or our own circumstances or whatever it may be, when we are placing that into something outside of us, right? It's like we're giving that power away and bringing that back and owning that and seeing it within us. That's a key right there for any kind of breakthrough or transformation that anybody's wanting to make. And it's interesting that just the way how you worded all that too, Dominic, just because again, like through my writings and through my book, when I had gone back, and it was actually, this actually came out through, I was doing a workshop, one of my first workshops that I had done. This theme had come up and I had blurted out this formula that I had never said before. And I had stopped the class. I'm like, I have to write this down. There's something in this. Like, this is exactly it. And it just felt like a key piece, but this is what sums up exactly what you said. So there's three things, three pillars that had come through. And this is what I now base all my coaching and all my things is based on these three pillars. And the first one is that we are all here. All of us are here for the same thing. And that thing being is that we are all here for expansion. We're all here for growth. We're all here to be more. We're all here to have more and to grow into more. There is no one person on this planet that I believe would be satisfied with just staying where they are and, being completely fulfilled. There's more, whether it's wanting more peace, more love in relationships, whether it is more money, more status, more anything. Like, you can think of it, more education, more knowledge. Like, we're always striving for more in some capacity. So that's the first pillar, is and so then we can look at how life experiences exactly what you said. They're all working for us and in response to us, and in a way that is always pointing us back to that first pillar. So all those experiences that are happening to us, it's like that's a second pillar, which is a perspective, right? Being able to see those things beyond the circumstance, beyond the physical thing, and see how it points back to, okay, what is this giving me as part of pillar number one, which is the growth? What is it that I'm to take from this experience that is for me? It could be a trigger, right? If you're in something someone has said or done that ignites that, that trigger within you. Okay, yeah, this person triggered me, but this is reflecting something within me now that I need to really notice and pay attention to as part of my growth and as part of that pillar number one. And then the third pillar that I have in there is all around that connection with ourself. And you can call that our intuition. You can call that our higher self. You can call that the universe, like whatever way that you relate to, how you connect to that larger, more wisdom, more intelligent part within us, that is within us, that we all have, right? The answer is there. That wisdom is within us. And the more that we can strengthen and connect back to that as we're moving through pillar one and pillar two, right? Using that intuition and using that guidance to be able to pull us back. This is what makes life easier. This is what helps make sense of things. Doesn't mean that things aren't going to continue to come up against us, because they do. It's a forever thing. We will always have that because we're always forever expanding. But what happens when you understand this in this way, it just makes it easier, and it makes our bounce back rate, I think, a little bit faster too than before.
Wow. Yes. I love listening to those pillars, and some of the people who may be watching our conversation will know me from various teachings, and teachings of Sydney Banks are one of them, and teachings of Abraham Hicks are another. I love, as I listen to this, that idea of here for expansion or growth. It's interesting because it is one way to say that is that we don't realize who and what we really are. So there's something around in this life experience. It is a realization, is a continual realization of who you really are, of all that you are. So this expansion or this growth becomes an expansion of the understanding of who you really are. And sort of the trouble in life or any challenges we've experienced, perhaps is a way to say it, is the challenges we've experienced came from a misunderstanding of all that I really am. And so that this expansion of me into more understanding of the truth of me is what this life experience continues to evoke, let's say. And I like that you linked it that way. In other words, there's something effortless about this. It's not like going to school, where we go to school to be educated about who we are. The third point you said is it's inside ourselves. There's a wisdom and intuition. Like you couldn't escape knowing, you couldn't escape being yourself, because it never goes anywhere. It's the energy, the spirit which is living and breathing you. So that can't go anywhere. You can't lose it. So it's an energy and spirit that lives and breathes you. It's inside. You always have access to it in every moment, under every condition, in every situation. You can go quiet and that energy is right there. And it's an all-knowing, an infinite intelligence. And in that direction is anything you want to know about the truth of you. Anything you want to know about the truth of you is available, because the truth of you is what lives you. The truth of you is what's living you. The way you said the life experience, it's also, I hadn't thought of it this way, but it's like, really, the truth of you is living you. And so to the degree that we're not allowing that, and we're not allowing it because we have a belief, we have some thought, and that says, well, but I can't do certain things. I can't say certain things under these situations. That person has more power than I do in these circumstances. So we say something, we think something, and then when that happens, it bumps up against the truth. And it's bumpy. It doesn't feel good, because the truth of us is wanting to live. But we say, no, you can't. You can't say stuff like that. You can't do things like that. You can't, right? So this truth of us just wants to live life. It wants to expand, as you said, that point number one. It wants to expand, its expansion and growth, to be fully alive through you. But then in that part too, our experience says you can't do that because that's dangerous, and you can't do that because then whatever. And so we're bumping up against it. And that is the creation of these circumstances. Then that is the creation of the circumstances that, well, if this is what you believe, it shows up in the people around you. It shows up in, the boss. It shows up in a relationship. It shows, they start treating you just as you believe. And then we blame them versus realizing something about that.
Yes. And I've been there, believe me. So I can relate to all of that. And that's exactly what takes place, right? Because it really does come back to our thoughts and the stories that we hold within ourselves. And just interesting, I just want to springboard off of that, because when you had said these things, it's our thoughts, and then that creates the relationships or the things that show up, whether it's our boss or whoever it is. And then we start blaming even more and start justifying, and right, because we're sitting in that space of it's a loop. And in the work that I do now, because I do hypnosis as well, which is so interesting. And I just love how doing the hypnosis piece ties all of this together, because it's actually, I can now, in doing work with people in this capacity, I see the moments, like there's moments when someone is in hypnosis where I can see that point happening, that breakthrough right in that spot. And it's because in that state, all those thoughts, all those things that are cluttering up and congesting the way to being able to tap into what's really in there, right? It's that fog, and because we've lived it for so long. But when someone's in that state, all of that's removed. And then they have a clearer path right to directly to their heart, their subconscious, right? Because that's the heart of your mind, is your subconscious, where all of this is alive and well and knows exactly what you're capable of, knows exactly what your potential is, doesn't look at all those stories. And it's interesting because when, if you were to ask, in my practice, like when I ask, one of the first things that I ask someone is, well, what do you want? Like, what is it that you want? And I was here too, so I can say this because this is why I hold true to asking this question, because it was asked of me one time and I was completely stumped, because all I could talk about was, well, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this to happen again. Or then when I was, asked again, well, what is it that you want? Well, I have no idea. Or then I would just come up with, why I want to be happy. Well, of course I want to be, everybody wants to be happy, right? Everybody wants to be happy, but what do you want? What does that look like for you? What does that feel like? What does that experience? What does that look like, as you're experiencing this happiness and this peace of mind? What is showing up in your life when these things are happening? And what happens is when we're caught up in that cycle of being over here and in the thoughts, as you said, and when we are pointing the fingers and being stuck in that cycle of, well, look at all the horrible things that keep happening to me over and over again. When we're asked that question, then yes, we get caught up with, well, I don't want this anymore. I don't want to feel this anymore. But because we've felt it for so long, we don't know that there's another way. We lose sight of that possibility because of all those thoughts. Right? So it really is a matter of, again, looking beyond the conditions and really being able to remove all that congestion, because that's what it is. They're just thoughts. They are just thoughts, and removing them to be able to then tap into, well, what does my heart really want? Like, what is it that I really want to show up for? How do I really want to fully express myself in this life? What lights me up, right? What brings that passion and makes me want to just jump out of bed in the morning because I'm just so excited to, and eager to see what the day has for me. And right, we lose that. And so it's such a beautiful thing, a beautiful moment when someone is going through this process, because when they're in that state of hypnosis, right, all of that is removed. And so I'm able to communicate directly with that inner wisdom, that part that knows exactly what the solution is, and be able to tap into that part to pull up, all this whole other reservoir of knowledge, of resources and everything else that we lose sight of just because of all this other stuff. So
yeah. Well, I love how what you're talking about is that where the secret to everything is in what you called the third point, which is that connection to ourselves, the going inside into that knowing and that wisdom. And that is really, let's call it this pure white light, which is this power source that lives and expresses into this life experience we have, this creation we have. And so when anything that would help people to touch that is the only thing that would be helpful. That's the only thing that would be helpful. As you said, most of us get lost in the misunderstandings of, but if I just change this, listen, I'm okay. I just haven't found the right relationship yet, which totally misses this. You're not going to be okay in the right relationship. That's not what it is. You're not going to be okay with more money. That's not what it is. But it really does seem like that. And it seems like that because there's this, pure white light source of me, which shines through distortion being thought. So it shines through distortion and it creates an experience of scarcity. It creates an experience of a relationship I do not want. It's this creative power that is who I am, a creator that I am, shining through current thinking, these thoughts, and then me being in this experience. So it really does look like, but if I were to change this relationship and get more money and just change my career a bit, that's actually all I need, because then I'll be good, right? But you haven't discovered, like, if that's all that happens, then you haven't discovered really. Like, you've missed the point. You haven't seen who you really are. You haven't fallen into what you said, that point underneath, which is the third point you made, which is that wisdom, that connection to ourselves, that knowing of you that you could never get away from, that is with you your entire life. It's going to be with you forever. That is that pure life, and it's never going anywhere, and it's always there. And if you knew it, wow, then there is where true peace, joy, well-being, that's where that is. It's only the distortion that can hide it, but it never goes anywhere. It's always there, always available.
Yeah. And to add to that too, because that's a really good point around, when I'm going to use the word chasing the thing, right? Because you had said, if it's a matter of just getting that relationship or having more money or changing the career, then, life will be good. But it's not, right? Because it's not about having or getting the thing, but it's about the growth that it takes within us to get there, which is back to the number one, right? That we are here for that growth, for that expansion, and that fulfillment in us fulfilling who we are here as being in this human form is for that expression and expansion of who we are. And so we're using these things, right? We're using these things, the desires that we have, like, I would love to have this, but who am I to become in the getting of it, in the having of it? What are the things that I need to evolve myself to?
Yeah, it's interesting with that too. This is what I love about the simplicity in how Sydney Banks distinguished this, which is that light is untouched. It is always pure. It is always pure white. And it's the pure possibility of all things, anything you can desire. So then what happens is it's really the dropping of thought. It goes back to the beginning of this conversation where you had that insight, let go, let go. That's all you were told. You weren't told, oh, because by the way, this is the way to get to the better life and all these other things. It was one instruction. The one instruction, let go, would give you everything you want. It would give you everything you want because it is in the letting go of this distortion, of this contaminated thinking in front. If you would let go, then what you're left with is this pure white light underneath that can take this life experience and expand it into more of who you really are. You become, were it not for my own holding of a thought, if I could let go, I would expand to become more of who I really am. I would expand, my being would expand. I would grow to more of the truth of me, were it not for my holding of this thought that I insist is true. I insist, but I can't because something happened to me. So I'm not like anyone else, or I'm not anymore at my potential because this happened to me and now I can't, right? So I insist, I hold. And so that remains there, sort of distorting and contaminating the truth of me.
Yeah. And then there's the element of awareness through that. Like that's kind of, as you're speaking, this is what I just feel like the awareness of this, having the awareness of when those experiences are happening, to be able to move yourself through it, to seeing in that different way. Because the thing is that until we allow that, as you explained, like the white light within us, until that's allowed to flow through and be and express in our lives, we will continue to be faced with the same kind of challenges, the same kind of obstacles. And I think what happens is we don't recognize that connection so much because the ways things manifest may be different people, different experiences, but they're all pointing to the same thing. So I think sometimes we miss the mark with that, where we just begin to assume, oh, it's just bad luck or just bad things keep happening. Look at all these things, not recognizing that they are really all connected to the one thing. Does that make sense? Like,
Totally. So I had a friend once who would tell me about their boss at work, and like a real micromanager, and was really quite an idiot, and, all of that. Right? It went on for many years, a few decades of that. And the interesting thing was that there were, I think, about 6 bosses in that time, but the description never changed, right? And in fact, then sometimes I'd get confused because they would tell me about it and I'd say, yeah, that Bob really does sound like quite a jerk. They go, Bob? I don't work for Bob. That was like 2 bosses ago. I'm talking about like, okay, well, I can't really tell the difference, right? I'm having trouble keeping up here with which boss are we talking about. And so the different faces, even different environments and different places, the experience is the same in some way, right? There's someone and they're not as smart, but they're the ones who are in charge of me and they never support me, right? So there's a whole thing all playing out in the same way over and over and over and over, like you said, until you wake up to what might be going on here. And there is that common element throughout, which is you've been throughout all of it. You've been throughout all of this experience. And so is it bad luck? Is there some other explanation for what this is? Yeah, it's fascinating.
And there's always a source to it too, right? There's always that one, because when we have something, especially when it's emotionally impactful, it leaves that imprint, right? And this is what starts that cycle. Like this is, speaking, this is hypnosis talk right now, but there is that root cause. There's that one pivotal moment that would have happened that would have started this thinking, because it had to start somewhere. Where does it start? Like, where do we start to believe, perhaps that we're not worthy of this, or when do we start to believe that we weren't capable? When did we start forgetting who we really were? Right? There's a moment, there's things that have happened that have, pulled us away from this remembering of who we are. Because I believe that as children, we do remember, we do know, we're still tapped into that.
Yeah.
You looked at, it's summer now. So there's, summer, the bands in the park, right? And it's always interesting to see, if you ever go to watch a band in the park, and it's the little kids, like the toddlers, the 3-4-year-olds that are up and, dancing around, bebopping around, just having a fun time, doing their thing. And the adults are the ones that are sitting where that they want to get up and do the exact same thing, right? We all want to get up and dance. When the music comes on, we all want to get up and dance. But the younger kids are the ones who are still tapped into that knowing of, well, I am, and I don't care what I look like. I don't care what, because those thoughts aren't there yet.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really a matter of bringing ourselves back to that remembering of who we really are, aside from, all those other, but it does start somewhere. It's like the pattern starts somewhere when we start to believe different and we start to forget that truth.
Yeah. You said something a few minutes ago where you said something like it's just thought, that it's all just thought, right? You said something like that. It's fascinating because that same statement is like, it's just thought, and thought equally, and thought is the entire creator of your life experience. In other words, that is the only creator of your experience. And equally, it is just thought. In other words, it's not a brick wall. It's not like literally some barrier to anything. So thought is ephemeral. Thought is ever changing. Thought is fluid and moving. So in that regard, it is just thought. And thought is the most powerful creator. Creating every detail of your life experience is created in thought. It is your thinking that is perceiving everything that is happening to you. So there's something of an interesting paradox when we talk about thought.
So then the question being then, how do we learn to not think certain things and think other things? Right? Because that really is a key, because to say it so, we can say that we know how this works. Yeah, it's just thought. Like, that's what it is. But it is easier said than done. Right. And if that's the case, then why aren't more people doing that? Why aren't we being taught this to learn how to do this in a way that's actually going to serve us?
Yeah, that's why, in my experience with this, is it does come down to understanding, a deeper understanding of who we are, our true nature, the nature of reality, who we are, our true nature, and the nature of reality. So who am I really? What is my nature? And what is the nature of this existence and my life? What describes that fundamentally, not at a content level? Right. Now, what was interesting is when you look to your experience, so the direct experience that you had, it happened in an instant for you. And when you think about that, what's the insight about that? Because there was no process required for you. In fact, you weren't even, that had nothing to do with this. You were out doing something else. There wasn't like, you know what? I'm tired of this limited thinking, and it's about time I got to the bottom of it and shook some of it off. You were nothing like that. You weren't even, there wasn't even an intention about any of that. So what do you think when you look at your direct experience in the moment was the reason that what made that happen?
Well, as I said, at that time, I was going through a very hurtful breakup. And it had been a series of not just one, but this was after, I don't know how many breakups with the same person over and over again. And I remember being at a point, I'm going to use, because this is a word that I use, this is how I understand it, is surrender. I was in a place of surrender. And what that means for me, the way how I use surrender is being in that moment where it's like, okay, I'm open. I'm open to seeing something different, because I was at a point where I knew that the things that I was doing just wasn't working. And I was open to being able to seeing something different. And I think when you have that, and that it was like the perfect recipe of that, combined with the vulnerability that I had felt. I describe it almost as like my heart was cracked open enough for the light to come in. I surrendered to it. I surrendered to just in that moment. And I think the actual, being out in the lake and being in the water, that has a way of just feeling, I don't know how to describe it, but I remember feeling that moment of, okay, well, if something happens to me out here, I'm okay with it. Like, it was at that point where, okay, I don't know what else to do. Like, I'm, we're in the middle of the lake, and just kind of letting myself be open. And the only word that I can describe to it is surrender. It's like, it was just that moment of, okay, surrender to just allow the light to come in or out even, right? Because if that light's within us, it was like that cracking open to just allow that to come out for that moment of being able to really connect and hear that in that way.
Wow. I find it fascinating and important that there wasn't the requirement to process through what had happened and what you made of what had happened. All of the limitations that you had been creating your entire life, right? So I find that fascinating when in these stories of how without processing and working through, there became this deeper insight. And I think maybe it's well said in the statement, it's just thought, because there's deeper realization in an instant of who you really are, your true nature. It's just thought would suggest it doesn't matter the thought. In other words, when I understand that the way who I am, which is a pure white light filtered by any thinking that creates an experience for me that I'm living in, then that understanding is fundamental to true nature and stripped of all content. So in other words, it would say it really doesn't matter how you limit yourself. And some have more, let's say we might agree, have more extreme situations where the thought they've put in the way of their light is a more extreme thought or a more dramatic even thought, maybe than what someone else has put in the way. But true nature is identical for everyone. So there's something in the realization, and it probably was said in that statement, it's just thought. Is it strips away all content of thought, all experience that created this particular thought. And then you can look like those children who are playing and dancing. The point is there is no thought of limitation. If you start, once you get adults like us, everyone's seated in the chair at that festival. Everyone's seated in their chairs and not dancing. You could go talk to them and they would all have a different story about the thought that limits. Oh, well, when I was a kid that someone laughed at me, I tried this and then everyone did that. And, everyone would tell a different story about the thought. But notice none of that matters. They're all seated in their chair and they're not dancing. It doesn't matter the thought. The nature of thought is a limitation. It is a contamination of the truth of who they really are. And the children at the festival don't have the same thing. And they are alive and dancing and enjoying life. And so we could go around to everybody to try to figure out, well, wait a minute, but when did it start for you? And who was it that said it? And let's go back and figure this all out. Or let's just understand our true nature, and we can see it by looking at the kids. It's all just thought. Every single person seated in their chair. It's all just thought in various varieties. Does it really matter? And then your own insight, which is to say, let go. Let go. You'll be like these kids. Let go. You will expand into your full aliveness and well-being. Let go. Whatever you're holding, let go.
That's really good. I love how you use that as an example, because that's exactly it. If you're to ask everybody's sitting there, you're right, everybody would have a different story. And the interesting thing about that just made me think of, the way how we carry our thoughts, because it's energy, right? If we can think of thoughts as energy, it's energy that moves through us, and it sets, it determines the emotional state we're in, it sets up our vibration. And, if you want to get into talking about the laws and attraction and all those things, like this is how it happens, right? Because the vibration that we're in is then what attracts like things back to us. And so when we're talking about this in terms of thought, and when we start thinking about the ways how we remember stories of things that we've experienced, and the ways how we're expressing it and talking about it, the thing is that as we're talking about these things, our mind and body does not understand the difference between 10 years ago, 40 years ago to now. Everything is just in the now. We're always in the now. So as we're remembering and talking about things in a way, because there's different ways of being able to express and tell your story. But if you're telling a story in a way where it's generating that same emotional response within you as if when it first happened, so even if it's something that happened 20, 30 years ago, as you're telling that story, if it's recreating that same emotional response, you're then moving that same energy through you, and your mind and body doesn't understand the difference, and your vibration is going to be that. And then boom, you're going to attract the circumstances, or you're going to start behaving in a way that's in alignment with that vibration.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So using that example, how you tied it back to, people sitting in their seats and telling a story. Well, as they're telling the story, I remember being made fun of when I was 10 years old at, we had a junior school, whatever it was. And as they're telling that story, they're remembering, it was a horrible experience. And, I remember just feeling awful as people were laughing at me. And well, that's creating that same vibration. And then it's then directing the action and the decision that they're making about whether they get up or dance or not. So then what's the key with that, right? Because we are taught, this is the thing, we are taught to talk about things in this way, right? We're taught about moving through and processing, as you said, in a way that we're looking at, okay, well, what caused this and what's happened and how can you, work through it in a sense of seeing it for, the experience that it is rather than seeing beyond the condition. So how do we work through that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like when you understand the nature of a movie. See, prior to understanding the nature of a movie, there is a pure white light in the projector, and they put in front of it forms, which are these images of film. It takes that thing and projects it out and becomes a real experience. And, so you're sitting in the audience, and especially without the understanding of it, there's all kinds of horrors and war and different things that are happening. And so you can really feel the emotion of it. And from a misunderstanding, you would run out of the theater. I heard the first time they did this, one of the first projections was of a railroad, like a train coming at the camera. Right. So the story says that in that first live moving picture, that the audience ran out of the theater. So from not an understanding of what this was, seeing a rail engine coming at you, the audience ran out of the theater. And this is the example of, from an understanding of what that is and the nature of what they were actually observing. Today, all of us can enjoy movies. We can enjoy movies. We are not afraid. And this is important, right? Not afraid of the experience of it, because we understand how that experience has been formed. We understand how it's been formed. And if we take that metaphor to our own understanding, I'm feeling fearful, worried, and anxious. Well, relax. I think it's because of them. I think it's because of what they're saying. I think it's because of the situation that I'm in. Well, hang on a second, right? How is experience formed, right? That's like the group in the theater running out of the theater because their anxiety was created by a train coming at them. Well, hang on a second. Is that actually what's going on? Right? If you understand the nature of all of this, it really does seem like that's what's going on. If you really understand the nature of this thing, you can relax a little bit. You can kind of sit in the middle of it. And what's going on is your own thinking in front of this pure life before you, which is expressing into this experience. Well, once you start to see that, you can relax a little bit because you actually have some choices. at that point. You don't have to go running out of the theater. There's more options available. You can be responsible. You can be empowered about this experience that's going on. You can start to see how this experience you actually get more of a say about than you thought.
So coming back to perception, right? And seeing, because when you're watching a movie from that perspective, it's you have an objective point of view. You're watching it rather than living it.
This is what's so amazing about us is we're living in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's better than any movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's better than any movie. We're not just as an observer. Our own thinking is entirely we live in the middle of it entirely. It's all around us. It's in the people around us. It's all of that. It is an entirely created, better than 3D reality. It's inescapable. There's no aspect of the experience that is not sourced from within. Yeah.
And then coming back to, again, that power that's within us, right? If we are that center point, right? We're the center point of all these things that are happening around us. Once we tap into that and really truly understand how that works and how it's moving through us to then create, then that is where the magic happens.
Right. Yeah. That's the realization of who you really are, your true power, who you are, your true nature, the nature of reality, how you are one with all of that. Yeah, that's exciting.
And then what that does is takes all of those things that have ever happened to you, right? Where then you're able to see them all. And again, and maybe that's, those puzzle pieces that were once scattered all over. Now suddenly they start fitting together and you're like, oh, that little piece where it was just a blurb of like a blotch of a color. I didn't know what it was. It didn't make sense. But now it fits in with this other piece and with this piece. And now I see the bigger picture and it makes so much more sense now in a way that, right? Like that's, yeah.
Wow.
Really good.
Well, this has been great. Let's see, how should we close? And then we should give people a way, and I'll include some stuff in the links about how to get to you. But anything you'd like to say to sort of complete this conversation?
Well, this was an absolutely incredible conversation. And I love how it came back full circle, coming back to ourselves. And this is what this work is really about. It's about guiding each other back to ourselves, back to our true self, because that is where that healing, that is where the creation, that's where all of, the solutions to everything that you're ever looking for, it really comes back to coming back to ourselves. And so I want to just thank you for this opportunity to be able to pull this together in such a magical way, like what we just did here. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I love knowing that you're in the world sharing this and available for people who are open to this and open to exploring something a little bit deeper than maybe as far as they've gotten in terms of, looking at what's going on. And what's an easy way for people to get in touch with you and find you?
The easiest way would be, I'm on Facebook, my name, Cristina Ruscica. And I also have my website, CristinaRuscica.com. And that has all my information just around my services, my hypnosis that I do, and the coaching programs that I offer as well.
Yeah. And I'm going to put the link and links when we have this shared as well, so people can easily find it underneath the video. So fantastic. Great connecting with you. And I loved our conversation.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dominic. This was wonderful. Thank you.
All right.